about justice, about NGOs, and once you don't believe in anything else, then you rely on what you see on the internet, which is strict. And that's a very interesting thing. The third example you see is a very bad screenshot of an Italian Facebook page, which has been created in 2012, which at the time was about football. And 4 years later, it became a page of Cinque Stelle, 5-star movement. Why? Because they built an audience posting a lot of football stories, which attracts people's interest. And once you follow this, when you have 100,000, 200,000, 1 million followers on Facebook, then you can start to change the talk. You can start to use football as a way to exile nationalists, for instance. That's happening in Spain right now. And that's exactly how you build an audience, and then you can distribute content. Whether you do it for your own purpose, could be political purpose, could be also financial purpose. You redirect people to pages where you have advertisement, as you said, and just like getting money out of it. So these three examples are three things that happened during the elections. And unfortunately, that were not covered by the code of practice because that was not the first step the code of practice took up. But the code of practice brought a lot of information about political advertising. I think there was a big debate in Flanders about how the Vlaams belong. For the first time has been shown as spending a large amount of money. In fact, it was a political party that spent the most money in all the European elections, far-right party in Flanders, and who had great results in the elections. If it's linked, that's a question. But the code of practice helped us to see how much money was spent by the Vlaams Belang on political advertising, to understand what kind of advertising they were made. So this was specifically about elections. But if you look at what's happening also at large, not only behind elections, you can understand that you have a clear appetite for people who want to jump in the conversation, to spread very polarizing discussions. The picture on the left is a picture during the Notre Dame fire that has been taken by a Sputnik reporter and posted on the Sputnik Facebook page with absolutely no comment. It took approximately 15-20 minutes to have this picture taken back to extreme right groups saying Muslims are laughing in front of Notre Dame building. And you can understand how content, even with no content, can be very easily decontextualized. And this person has been living hell because they were purchased online, pursued to find who they were and to be harassed, just because actually the ribbon that you see get a back in their face, and that's why they laughed at the picture. And this has been very interesting to understand how this very interesting, in a very emotional debate, which is Notre Dame, which is a symbol of Christianity, burning in Paris, which is for many far-right people like one of the countries which have been leading the war in Syria and having a lot of migration. This is very explaining how much this can be turned into weaponization and to fuel disinformation and to fuel hate through disinformation. On the right, you see one of the most shared articles in Spain just before elections from a very small newspaper that you don't know, Alaphilippe, which was basically explaining that the company that is in Catalonia managing the electronic vote is actually owned by Soros. Of course, this company is not owned by Soros, and this company was not even in charge in Catalonia. But this explains how, and if you read the article in Spanish, you have nothing about this. You just have something about how the left is trying to put something to prevent the right to rise to power. And I think this is very interesting because this is very shared, but with absolutely no information in that article. If you read this, you have absolutely no information. But the clickbait thing is very powerful to attract voters, to attract people, especially at times where you don't know what's happening. And the time for a fact checker, a journalist, to work on this is 10 times the time needed to write this kind of thing. And this is a very, let's say, this competitive advantage between fake news providers and journalists, because it takes a little bit of imagination, a little bit of being smart to produce this information, and you can have a huge effect on it. So I think, at the end, one of the questions I would like to raise, I think it's not that much about the content regulation, because there is a lot of work which is done by journalists and fact checkers. I think one of the questions we'll have to deal in the next 5 years is to look at content distribution, how content is distributed online. What is the role of algorithm? What is the role of AI? What is the role of recommendation on social giants, on YouTube? What is the real impact of it? And for the moment, we are a little bit in the dark of this. We cannot know exactly what's going on. We don't know if a Facebook page, when it has 1 million followers, if these followers are actually here or not here, if they're actually true or not true, if they're actually robots or human beings. And that's one of the questions that will be brought up. So there are progresses that were made in the past month. We have now transparency. We have the beginning of the transparency of political ads, and it's a very good step. It was very well needed. As I said, we are better with the code of practice than without a code of practice. But how do we do with ads which are not classified as political? And that's something we see more and more. Pages that don't see they are political or don't claim they are political, but like the question of issue-based advertisement. I'm giving you a very short example. Let's say, that I'm a gas company, and I'm producing a Facebook page just saying that there will be shortage next year, and during elections I can say that there will be shortage next year, and that maybe you should vote for someone who is actually providing a new pipeline to the country. The second question is like, is self-regulation the good question for code of practice? That's a good question, and that's the question that how the platforms are reacting to this, and I think there is a very important question to be raised here. There is a rapid alert system between the member states, which is also a very good step. The question is like, do exchange of information has provided results? I think we're a little bit in the dark here, in the participation maybe of civil society to rapid alert system, to build on the civil society experience on this. I think that would be very interesting. There is a call for and a need for platform for fact-checking and research. There is currently a tender launched by the new commission on this, and SOMA was the first step, and there is a new tender on this. That's a good question. What kind of information can we share with each other? And I think the impact information of the platforms are really important. There are more takedowns by the platforms, but I think we need to know why are these takedowns made. Some of the platforms are giving archives, which are anonymized, to be able to understand what kind of behavior has been tackled on. I think that's a good progress to have this kind of understanding the internal process and to have transparency about this, to avoid any suspicion of bias, which some of the platforms are accused of. And what to do with non-political content. So I think we should think about a broad transparency on distribution and not and on impact more than on actual regulation behind what is actually regulated by laws in different countries.
Where is it? Many thanks. That was very enlightening. The examples, I think, will remain as a way to guide the discussion as we move on. But I will now turn to Lubos. We have heard, in essence, this message. With the code of practice and with the other actions, including the establishment of class, we are today, in all likelihood, in a better place than we would have been without these actions. But there are still many areas of darkness, right? We do not know, we have not a full view of the whole spectrum of political communications, and there is not enough transparency about it. And there are still many uncertainties as to the manner in which the distribution of content, in particular political content, operates on social media. What is your view from the point of view of the regulator, who has been also involved in the monitoring of the code of practice during the election period? Tell us a bit your thoughts about it.
Thank you, Paolo, and thanks for the organizers to having me here. It's an honor. I'm Lubos Kuklis. I'm Chief Executive of Slovak Media Authority, and I'm also current chair of ERGA. ERGA is European Regulators Group for Audiovisual Media Services, which gathers all the media regulated from all the EU countries. And we've been we started to think about disinformation a long time ago, of course, but we hadn't had any opportunity to do something about it because, as you can imagine, there's no media regulator currently in the EU, except for France very recently, that has any competence over disinformation. And the problem also is that very few of regulators, media regulators now in Europe, have competence over online digital environment. Now, when the action plan started and when Code of Practice was issued, we were tasked by the Commission, because we are also advisory group for the Commission, to help them to monitor the implementation of the Code of Practice by the platforms. And this is where we actually got the competence to look into this information, and of course we were willing to help. Of course, we started to think about how to do it. The problem of the Code of Practice is that there are not really clear objectives there. There are no KPIs to follow, so it is hard to assess something that doesn't have them. But at least it's a start. So we, of course, were willing to do that. And on voluntary basis, 16 of our members try to do the monitoring during the EU elections in their countries. Now, of course, this is something new for all of us. So we started to cooperate with researchers. We asked us questions, of course, and we learned from them how to do these kind of things. And what we found out during this process of monitoring is that although the digital archives are there and many other initiatives started by the platforms very useful, they haven't gone all the way, so to say. During the elections themselves, we've seen many of the false positives or sort of false negatives that in the archives we haven't seen the ads, the political ads that we were seeing, so to say, on the ground. And of course, it's been really a small portion of what we could see, because as you can imagine, the targeted kind of advertising means that every user sees something different. So even we, as we were looking at that, we've seen only a portion of that. But we also cooperated with researchers who've done comprehensive monitoring, so we have seen that also there are other problems than that. And we learned quite a lot during this process. Now we know much more about what we can do. I think that the report that we gathered and we provided the Commission with, and then also the platforms who already have seen it and responded to it, was, I think, very useful for everybody who is trying to look at this problem and find some kind of solutions. And moving from that, we agreed with the Commission to help them to assess the implementation of Code of Practice. And also, we will try to put down a few recommendations how to go forward. Because I think this is really important, because we have Code of Practice now. We know what platforms can do on a voluntary basis. Now the question is whether this is enough and what we can do about it in the future. Now, there are two things that are, I think, quite clear from all of this. One is that we need researchers on board to understand the problem. And now that we have a directive, Audiovisual Media Services Directive, at the table that has to be implemented by all the member states, I'm calling upon our members, for those who doesn't have research as their remit, to try to convince their governments and parliaments to put it there, because this is something really crucial. I'm not saying that everybody or every regulatory authority has to do the research themselves. At least you have to have a capacity to understand what the research means and how to cooperate with researchers. So this will be one important step. The other is transparency. Now we know that the platforms are capable of providing data on many things. They are capable of providing those archives. There are many people, and we know with Paolo, we spoke with them many times, that there are dedicated people working for the platforms on really these problems. Now, the real problem is accountability, because when we asked for some data during the elections, the answer was, well, in such a short period, we can't provide everything you asked for. Okay, that's understandable, but what about later on? Okay, we can provide you with some data, and how we will know that the data are relevant, or will they be somehow verified? Well, no, we have to really rely on what the platforms are saying. So I think we have to start in transparency. Now, how to do that is the real question, right? And on Friday, we were sitting with researchers working on these problems together in Social Science 1, and they were saying, well, we are gathering data, we have ways how to scrape data from platforms, but it needs only a very small change to their internal policy, and then you get nothing. So we need to somehow ensure that there is transparency in this, and that the data that we are getting are verified. Many people are looking to media regulators, or are trying to look at other authorities or creative authorities that can do this kind of work. Well, definitely, there needs to be some kind of authority that will do this kind of work. Now, the problem, of course, is this authority needs to be also accountable. There needs to be ensured that privacy of the users is ensured. So these are the questions we need to put together and somehow make work. So I think when we will put down some recommendations, it will be in this regard. And now, this is a long-term goal, so to say. Now, short-term goal for us as regulators will be, when we started to do this kind of work, we were thinking, okay, what can we contribute, what already has been done in this area? And of course, media regulators have been working on what we call internal plurality, subjectivity, news, how the news are spreading, for example, on the old traditional media environment. And we found out that there is no report or any comprehensive study putting together this information. So we did it ourselves from the beginning of the year, and it is out there, you can read it on our website. Now we are thinking what we can do further. And we found out that, for example, political advertising, there's no common definition in Europe. Every state has its own. What are the electoral campaigns? All these kind of things. So if there is nobody else doing it, we are willing to do that, to map this environment, to put together these definitions, and if possible, have some recommendations what to do, like really immediately about those, because only when you have harmonized definitions, then you can really work on other steps, how to cooperate among the states, and how to ask the platforms to do the same kind of work for every state, because this is another threat I think we're facing, that the bigger states, those that have a lot of users and big markets, are much more able to force platforms to do the things. Smaller states, not that much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lubos. Also, not only for your very pertinent remarks, also for having kept the time in a perfect way. Indeed, there are important issues here, and the issue about enabling an environment which is sufficiently transparent and evidence-based, so that relies on real data and not on assumptions. It is real cracks of the matter, and the need to enable research which is built into the civil society and it belongs it is not, let's say, under the suspicion to be under governmental control, but it is independent in nature. It is very, very important for the credibility of the whole exercise around this information. So now I'm turning to you, Raphael. Raphael Kergueno is a policy, as I said before, is a policy officer for Transparency International. It's an NGO. It is exactly one of these antibodies that should operate in order to ensure that the oversight that is exercised over digital media comes and is rooted into the civil society, and therefore has this imprinting of independence, which is so important in a democratic society. And I would like to hear your point of view about what we have around the question we have raised, but also if you want to comment on what you have just said from the other speakers.
Thank you very much for introducing our subject. So good morning, everyone, and also thank you for Compact and European Digital Media Alliance for organizing this event. So my name is Raphael Kergueno. I work for Transparency International, which is the global leading movement in anti-corruption, and more specifically, the sub-body of that is political integrity. And what I'd like to do today is to look at the code of practice perhaps in a different angle, coming from our work on political integrity. So I work in the money and politics team, and we're looking at And basically, we look at regulating or how the flow of money goes into our political systems. And there are usually sort of three gateways. One is lobbying activities that you're all quite aware of. The other is conflict of interest. And finally, the one that I wanted to address today is political finance. And on each of these three flows, we have rules in place that try to safeguard against undue influence, but also ensures that there is transparency and accountability of how that money is used to influence the political process. And why I want to look at political finance is that actually when you look at the code of practice, there are certain elements that are very similar to what's happening at national level in political finance regulation. To kind of situate this, I'd like to introduce to you a little bit the key aims of what political finance is about. And basically it's to guarantee that our elections are fair, clean, and clear. Fair in the sense that we give equal opportunities to all the political parties and actors to compete on a level playing field. Clean in making sure that the money that flows into the political process is from actors that are actually authorized to participate in the elections. And clear is that we actually have measures that shows that we can follow the accountability of the money that flows into the elections. And if we translate this into political advertising, we have a set of sort of very clear rules that you will find in most campaign finance regulations around the EU and other democracies. And the two that are very interesting for us when we talk about social media are spending limits and campaign finance controls and equal airtime rules. And spending limits and campaign finance controls are rules in place that allow that basically make sure that every political actor spends the maximum same amount of money in the elections, and that you don't have one political party that suddenly has the ability to outspend all the other ones and thus influence the election and making sure that they guarantee that they can win. And the problem with social media is that it's actually very hard to track how the money is being spent online. The other thing that you can find, the other sort of element that you will find in political advertising regulations are equal airtime. Now this is a sort of a 20th century concept where traditional media, whether it's broadcasting like TV, radio, and newspapers, where you ensure that they give the same amount of space to political actors. And again, on social media, it's very hard to implement this. So why would this be a problem? Well, for the purpose of this presentation, I just wanted to look at the national campaign finance law and see which campaign finance law were specifically having provisions on online political advertising. And I only find 3 EU member states so far. And perhaps this could be challenged. So this comes from the EU, the IDEA Political Finance Database. And this means that actually not a single member state has really in their national campaign finance law provisions on online political advertising. So in other words, they're using rules that are fit for the 20th century to platforms that are decidedly working in the 21st century. Now luckily for us, at EU level, we have the code of practice, which in a certain sense is perhaps the first step of trying to bring some transparency and accountability that normally traditional campaign finance law would do. So we have section B3 of the code that actually encourages platforms to create public disclosure of political advertising and with sponsor identity and amount spent. So in other sense, trying to create this transparency and accountability, which is the first element of regulating political advertising, so transparency and accountability of spending in and outflows of political finance. And all 3 major platforms have actually signed the code and have now implemented the so-called ad library. So they look like this. I did some screenshots. And actually, this is a very good step forward because at least on 2 out of 3 of the platforms, we can actually follow the inflows of money. We can see how much money was spent. We can also identify advertisers, so this accountability mechanism. But how they were implemented themselves, if you do the exercise, it's actually very hard to tie up all the money to one single political actor. So what happens very often in the national elections, even third parties that are not directly tied to a campaign, when they spend money in the political campaign, they contribute to the spending limit. So you could actually have people that spend money on a campaign unknowingly contributing to the limit, and parties that doesn't know that people are spending money on the campaign. But that is maybe one element. Another element is actually actors that are trying to influence the election, hoping simply that they won't be detected. so that they're spending money and breaking the campaign finance laws by trying to influence the elections with more money, perhaps spreading it out through different actors. And one example is just simply basically on Facebook, the political advertising is tagged to a page. So you have the political parties that spend this much money, you actually have candidates that are authorized advertisers that spend money on themselves, but you cannot directly see to which campaign they belong to. Then on top you have individuals and companies that spend money on political advertising, and to be able to track down how much money was spent on one campaign for one actor, you actually have to do it manually. You download the data set, you tie each actor manually to a political campaign, which of course makes it very hard for regulators, civil society organizations like us, perhaps journalists in the room, to track down exactly how much money was spent on one specific campaign. And this could be very problematic when we're talking about referendums, where the multiplicity of actors that are trying to influence the outcome could be even bigger than in a traditional political campaign. So, what are the main takeaways? I mean, this is more sort of an open-ended discussion. The first thing is, can the code guarantee fair, clean, and clear elections? In other words, can the code actually function as a political finance regulation? As I said, currently it's extremely difficult to track expenditure across all three platforms, and we need to be ensured that spending limits are actually respected. But the other thing, what about equal airtime? This is a whole different discussion, because this is absent from the code right now. And how could you actually apply an equal airtime provision to social media? Would you perhaps say you're allowed a certain number of posts? Or perhaps also we could translate it into the use of data. Should every political actor have the same amount of data available to do political advertising? And these are questions that are extremely important to address in the future. And perhaps on a deeper level, how can we encourage member states to introduce specific legislation on online political ads? Most member states currently don't have it. And as Lubos mentioned, to have a single definition of what is online political advertising, and specifically also on issue-based online political advertising, which can vary from political process, is very much needed, because the platforms, they operate in all member states. And if we want to ensure compliance, if we have a single definition at EU level, we also have a better way of making sure that the platforms respect national law, but not just the platform, but also all the actors that use those platforms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raphael, for your very clear and very focused intervention. I think we can go now on perhaps a second round of discussion. What we have heard so far is that if the world is looking slightly better, it is far from being perfect. Of course, we are not aiming here at perfection, because perfection does not belong to our world, but we are always trying to improve the situation as from the point in which we are today. Now, I have heard calls about the need to create more accountability, built on transparency, but more accountability by enabling a real independent but also institutional oversight on the digital information space, and for that they need to have the power, the national authorities, to carry out their functions in collaboration with research groups, because when the things become very technical, the authorities may not be fully equipped to carry out inquiries and surveys deep into the digital space, and for that researchers are needed, and access to data is the key question, how to unblock the current reluctancy of online platforms, which are the main holder of the data that are needed in order to map out what is going on in the information, digital information space, how to unblock that reluctancy, which is very much, for the moment justified by the alleged need to protect people's privacy. And on the other side, on a specific point, which is the front of transparency of political advertising, which is very important, because calling into question also responsibilities that go beyond the platforms and the private actors that operate within the information, the media, digital media space, but it involves the responsibility for political actors as well. How how far we are from a situation where such a level of responsibility is clearly identified with the proper definition, etc. But I would like to now to look further and to look into the future with you to see what is now the most urgent, what are the most urgent things that need to be done. Bear in mind that it is not, disinformation is not only about creating transparency for political advertising, based advertising. It is not only about empowering the public authorities to control that the rules that apply offline are also respected online. So to have a 21st century approach to media, but it is also to step up the efforts to debunk activities, conducts that deliberately manipulate the space, and Alexandre brought some example of those, and how to empower the consumers, to have the consumers, let's say, more aware on their own daily basis and the activity in their own use, interactions with digital media, with social media in particular, how to better empower consumers by providing them more diversity in the content that they get and more information regarding the trustability of the sources of news that they are accessing through digital and particular social medias. So to have a more 360-degree view of the needs for multiple actions that converge towards the same objective, which is curbing the phenomenon of disinformation. What is, in your view, the most urgent steps that from now on, in the next, let's say, 12 months, that should be taken in order to tackle these issues? And I will follow the same order, if you allow me. I will start with you, Alexandre, then Lubos, and then Raphael.
Thank you, Paolo. I think if we're looking very much at I'm very uncomfortable with the question of trustable sources because it's all a matter of personal issues. And maybe you consider a trustable source something I don't consider as a trustable source. So I think that way of trying to define what's true, it's very much complicated. You have a lot of work on artificial intelligence on this, trying to understand what is a reliable source, what is not a reliable source. I think in the real world, we have a way to understand this. In the real world, when we go to a press shop, we don't have every information available. We have editors which publish reviews, which have numbers, which have an address, which have all that kind of real-life information. And you have someone responsible for this. You can call that person, you can write that person. And I think at some point, I don't understand why in the digital space you have that kind of blurry world where you don't know what's going on, you don't know where the information comes from, you don't know where it goes. And I think we should think, and I think that's a collective work we should all do together. It's like trying to think like, is there a way to apply what's going into real world to what's outside the world? I'm taking an example. You would never go onto the corner street and someone gets to you just like, yeah, I have information here, do you want it? No, you find this sketchy. But that's something you do online. Because this has been shown to you and you don't know what's going on, and you don't know if the guy is in a well suit or in a hoodie trying to sell you something that you don't want. So I think it's very much appealing how we behave online, and because we are, and some of the studies show it, like we are captivated by this, and we have a very little time of attention. I'm going to bring something which was very interesting a few days ago in Brussels. There were a study about a newspaper, like an online newspaper called EP Today, and very good study from ES Stratcom on this, and how this outlet was using Voice of America and Russia Today content. The study was very good and mentioned a link to India. Like all press was about this is Russia, you know. And when you look into the investigation, when you look at the article, and when you look at the investigation we published the same day from our side, we were looking at the Indian interest group, but like there were no corrections in media because the story is gone, and we're looking for the other one, and we're looking for the other one. So I think we are purchasing something which is always new, always catchy, always more attention, and what was true yesterday is not true tomorrow. So I think that's why I'm very much looking at more transparency on the content distribution. Why am I seeing this content? Am I seeing it because my friends recommend it? And who are the friends that are recommending this to me? I am seeing this because I don't think that I should see this because it's helping me to have a better things. Is it recommended because I have seen that video before, and try to understand myself how I see, to understand the path I've been shown to see that kind of content. And from the researchers' point of view, it's exactly the same. We want to know what kind of mechanisms are bringing people to that kind of behavior, what kind of content, and what is the impact. There is, right now, in the US, a huge controversy on the trial, again, one of the biggest companies. I'm not going to name it, but I think you know the one I'm thinking about, because they fake the number of video views that they have on the platform. So we need to have real numbers of how many people have seen something. If we have a page with 1 million followers, we don't need to know who they are. We just need to know maybe where they're based. If you have a page with 1 million followers operating in Brussels, but managed from China and only Chinese people are reading it, it's not a threat to you. It's something that you should understand, but that's not a threat. So I think we should look at this more on the distribution side. And there are very interesting works about comparing this to corruption and dark money. We all have money in our pockets. We all spend it for different ways. This one is traced. Every time you do a payment, it's traced. But who is looking at it? Your bank. And in case of trial, corruption, or any investigation by public authority, then there is the possibility to have an investigation on this. Maybe information could be the same way, like to have a trace on what information is produced, what kind of hubs are exchanging information together, and when there is a need for an investigation, we are able to trace it back. So I think we should not look at content regulation, like what's true, what's false. That's the job of journalists, that's the job of civil society, and that's not the job of authorities. But we should look, and that's what we need, strong public authorities, and I think there is a huge skill gaps inside regulators right now on this issue, to understand what's going on in these platforms, what's going on, and why do we see that kind of content.
Very good. But you make a transition for Lubos, because there are two questions in terms of regulation and media regulation. One is how to move from content regulation to a kind of certain framing and understanding the behaviors of the actors within this open digital space of information, so which is a kind of a new challenge for media regulators who have been typically looking at content regulation as the main function. And on the other side, whether there are gaps in terms of media regulation. I've heard about duty to correct, right of reply, equal airtimes, all concepts and rules that apply offline, which are very difficult to apply online. So there is a question of regulating or creating a playing level field, or a level playing field between different media across the online, offline divide, and how to expand the activities and the surveillance of media regulators on issues that have not been so far looked at, like conduct, users' conduct, also these, more generally, all digital actors involved in this space.
Thank you.
What your views there?
A lot of questions.
Yeah.
But indeed, the environment is changing completely, and we have to acknowledge that. And in the old traditional world, we had this media regulators dichotomy. Media had all the editorial control, and so they have all the rights and responsibilities. And then the regulators, very broadly, saying that they were representing the public interest in those relations. But now we have active user, which is editor on its own right. It's a producer. It's the one who is really moving things forward, collectively, of course. And the platforms, well, they're saying we are not editors. Of course, they have a role that is not really negligible in this editorial process. But indeed, they are not the producers, and they are not, the editorial responsibility and control is divided between user and them. And now, so we don't have this dichotomy. We have a triangle kind of diagram that we have to take into account, and this is something that the regulation has to take into account. and we need to empower the user in the means that he has to have his own rights, and those rights should be enforced vis-à-vis the governments, but also vis-à-vis the platforms. So this is the new challenge for us, and it started also with already with the AVMS directive, because it really introduces the regulation of video sharing platforms. It is only directed at audiovisual content, but those platforms will be actually YouTube, for example, which is like essential video sharing platform, but also video content on Facebook or Twitter or other platforms like I don't know, Dailymotion in France and TikTok, for example. Yes. So this is we already have this kind of start of the new regulation. Now it's up to governments and the regulators to understand this properly and understand that really the active user has to have rights, and we have to enforce those rights on the platforms. That, for example, in the AVMS there is a call for transparency and content moderation. Now, which is quite well hidden into the text, because I don't think that anybody was at the time that it was created were thinking about these things in detail, because nobody knew how this will develop. But now the content moderation is a huge thing on the platforms, but it's really only the internal policies of the platform that count. There is no real protections or any kind of rights that the user has. It's only what the platform allows you to do. Now, it's a good thing when you think about harms of the user, because you have to protect children, and there are really nasty content on the platform. So it is good that they are doing this. On the other hand, there's a lot of mistakes happening in here, or well, at least some kind of misunderstandings, and a lot of content is being taken down without the users have any rights to do something about it. Now, for example, Facebook already in 2018, I think in half a year, June or something, introduced the appeal procedure, which is a good step forward. But again, without any transparency, clear transparency about what is going on, because you don't even know the rules. You don't know the basic rules, but you don't know the rules into the details. We've been talking with platforms a lot about this, and I've seen many examples, and I've seen how the content moderators are working, and the rules to really tiny details. No regulators in anywhere in the world ever worked on such a level of minuteness and detailness when considering any content. Now, it is understandable on one side, because you don't want the content moderators, 30,000 of them for Facebook, to be deciding which content should be eligible and is legitimate to have on the platforms. So they really need to instruct them to do very kind of detail. But it goes down to such a detail that no uneducated or initiated person would understand the differences. I had problems myself when I was shown different practices and different examples, and I said, well, now I understand when you explain me, but I don't think that any user would. So this goes like this, and nobody knows that these rules are there. So we need to find out, and we need to understand. So again, it goes with the implementation of the directive. We have to think about it, and we have to direct our governments, advise our governments to put real transparency rules into that. Now, on the question, this is a legal kind of question, but there are other questions what we can do, I think, in a soft kind of approach. And we were talking about trusted sources. And I've been talking to the platforms about this idea previously, and with also others. We have press councils in many EU member states, not all of them, but in many. And what they are doing for their members and for the outside world is to ensure that, well, you have to have some kind of editorial rules, editorial procedures within your media. That will ensure that you can be our member, for example, and then you can have this stamp, that you can have this trusted sources kind of mark on you that people can understand. So we can have it in the offline world. We can have this kind of thing also in the online world. If there really is a cooperation between these kind of press councils and the platforms, they can translate this information, and people can see. Of course, not everybody is seeking truth, but those that are seeking truth can really have a mark on the website or on the media, Facebook page, for example, that yes, this is a medium that will ensure that mark there will ensure that this media has I don't know how many steps of editorial procedures there, and they are ensuring that all the facts that they are putting forward are verified and so on. So this is one of such a things. And then, for example, going forward, like real real legislation. Everybody's talking about mysterious Digital Services Act, and nobody knows what that means actually. But I think there are very high hopes in society about that. But at least we know that there is to be some kind of legislation putting forward. And there are many things that have been neglected, I think, so far. And even when we're talking about transparency, because Alexandre already spoke about attention economy. This is such a huge, untapped kind of part of what the digital space is doing. And we haven't looked at it in any detail. For example, the design of the platforms, the design of almost everything is really untouched by legislation. But in the offline world, it is absolutely traditional that you have some kind of assurances that the design is somehow congruent to the purpose of the thing. And when we're talking about transparency, I'm reminded about NetzDG, which is a controversial German law, of course. But one thing that is done quite right there is transparency. The platforms are to be putting out information about all the complaints that has been put there and so on. And now the researchers have been looking on how this is designed actually. Because what Facebook is, for example, doing is dividing the complaints according to their own community standards and according to NetzDG. So to file a complaint with community standards is a really fast-track process. You can do it very quickly. When you go to NetzDG, there are 14 steps you have to go through. You know, it's extremely slow. They are always reminding you that this is a legal thing and it might probably, you never know, you know, come back to you somehow. So there are only like 200 complaints a year about that, you know, and 30,000 on the other side. And it's only done by design of the whole thing. Nobody ever, you know, told the Facebook how to do that, and Facebook know how to do that, you know, if they want to discourage people to file a NetzDG complaint or the other one. So, and this is very easily done by them. And this is just one example of how these things can be done, and without any regulatory overview, no legislation there. So I think attention economy, design kind of things, you know, we have to, at least in broad terms, put there some kind of rules. And then, of course, a competent regulator who can then, you know, take things up from that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have I think our time is approaching. We have still 5 minutes. And I would like to profit these 5 minutes to ask you in particular, Raphael, to tell us, us meaning the Commission, what would you think would be the 3 most important things that the Commission should undertake in the next 12 months? In this area, of course, not in general. In this area.
Well, I think one of the key problems that we're facing right now, and I think would be really crucial that should happen, is simply a lack of research into how these online ad libraries actually apply within the national context. So the first and foremost important thing in the next 12 months would be to encourage that this research actually takes place. And why this is important is because in a national context, the laws are very different from country to country. I myself have spoken to some social media platforms and they've said that it's a patchwork of different legislation, and they have to themselves find out how their kind of systems apply in this context. And just to give an example, some countries, they have a sort of a ban on political advertising during the elections. Others don't. Some have those infamous spending limits, others don't. Some have transparency rules on donations, others don't. And so basically we need to figure out what is the best model moving forward by comparing how these ads libraries, how they operate within the national context.
And this is one good thing.
Okay. Well, the second good thing I think is we can agree on is that we need to settle on the definition of online political advertising. And so I think there the Commission can really play a good role. It can, in its context with both the different actors here, but also with the member states, to see if there's a willingness perhaps to actually reach that threshold. Because of course, if we start moving forward, as some are suggesting, from a voluntary code to a regulatory code, if you have a regulatory code or regulation, then by default you will regulate what the definition of online political advertising means for the EU, with incidences on a national level. Well, I think for now. I think those 2 points I think are really crucial.
If I may, Paul,
Yes.
just one thing that I think all of this we've been talking about, there are many things, but we need coordinated approach on EU level, and we need local understanding. That is a crucial thing, because if we have local understanding and only local approach to those kind of things, we are not getting anywhere. And without local understanding and only some kind of regulation on the EU level, again, that's not really helpful. We need both local understanding and EU-wide approach.
Okay, understood. I would like to really ask the audience here if there are questions from their side that I would like to raise for our panelists. I would like you to state your name and your products. I have a question here and another question over there.
My name is Tanja Pavlska. I come from Slovenia. I'm a researcher at a research institute. I work in policy and recommendations for media regulation at the moment. So what I would like to ask is, how do you know what political advertising is in the first place? That's a question for you. In order to follow or trace the process of political advertising, and how do you know which actors to include in it? Because very often this is subtly and latently done by ordinary users, or let's say so-called influencers, which are not even marked as the one to be followed for this purpose. I will tell you an example. For example, in Macedonia, in the last elections, influencers on Twitter were the driving force of mobilizing the voters, and then they became part of the new government.
It's a question for who? For everybody?
For mainly for Raphael.
Thank you very much for your question, and it's a very good one to know who are the political actors that are allowed to participate and to be included in what we would define as people offer us to spend money in elections. But I think it's the spending time that we need to look at. So basically, in most legislation, third parties are just included in the campaigns, and there's a reason for which is that it's not just the political party or the candidate or the political party, it's also a company or any kind of individual that actually spends money that is included within the spending limits. And so anybody that spends money should be considered, whether they're users or anyone, should be considered as falling under the campaign finance regulation. The problem is, how do we actually make sure that individuals understand this? And perhaps one solution would be for platforms to proactively inform users, careful, you are now following on the campaign finance regulation. There is a little bit of this as well, but what's happening right now in the about section of like, I want to do political advertising, is make sure you comply with national laws, full stop. And perhaps a more proactive information of careful in the country you are in, the campaign finance laws contain certain provision, and actually inform the users of those provisions, and also making sure that each person that actually spends money is then tied to a political campaign. And we're only talking about during electoral campaign when these laws actually kick in. Does it make sense to you?
Technically it doesn't. I mean, it's logical, but technically. My background is in electrical engineering, so you know,
You probably know.
Anyhow, we have more questions. There is you first, and the second question
There's mine.
Hello, my name is Luis Morago from Alaphilippe, and thank you for the mention earlier. Some of you, I think, already know some of the work and some of the views we have. I think I'm very pleased, and we are very pleased to see that there are kind of increasing alignment on a number of things that need to be tackled. The transparency side, the issue of the algorithms that we need to understand and start seeing how they stop promoting the kind of stuff that we are seen as really toxic for our democracies. And some of the labeling and the work around political ads and transparency is very important. Still, there is something that you know that is very much in our hearts, because as a citizen movement, we see it every day, and not only in the context of elections. We are seeing it now in Catalonia. We see it with the climate denial videos that they are promoted again and again by the algorithms. We see it with health, public health issues like the measles, the anti-vaccine campaigns. What happens if we want to really empower the citizens, the users? What happens once you are exposed to that kind of misinformation? How the platform should react and how we should try to regulate. I think some of you know that we've been trying just to see where the EP Today example maybe is not necessarily fake news, because it was more misrepresentation of a particular. So in principle there was no fake news content, but there were like 140,000 Facebook friends following in good faith that. What do? We should try maybe to think that those people have the right to know what happened with that platform. Or for example, if myself, my family is exposed to anti-vaccine campaigns, very sophisticated, and we decide not to put a vaccine on our children, and something really bad happened, don't we need someone to send us a notification saying, well, the content you saw is being verified independently, and it's proven to be like not correct? And not necessarily even deleting that content, but just bringing like something that is fact-checked and can bring that plural, balanced information. So the question is that I know that there is an issue with content, and we are internet freedom of expression campaigners. How we can handle that? How we can empower the user to know what's going on?
Alexandre, a very quick reply, because we are 11 o'clock, and I have still one question I would like to give.
In short, unfortunately, human beings doesn't like contradiction, and there are very interesting studies that show that even like when brought to contradictory arguments, sometimes it doesn't work. So I think we have to be very creative in this. I'm very unhappy with content being taken down and you don't know why, and it just disappears. And at the same time, I think we should be also very careful. I had one friend telling me the other day, like, he was searching on Google just like side effect for vaccination for babies, and like everybody's wiped out. Everything's wiped out, you know, because of all of the content that has been produced, and there is a huge scrutiny about side effects of vaccination, which exists. There are side effects of vaccination, but like not being able to find it just like reinforced that there is something going wrong with how information is displayed. So I think we need to rehabilitate trust. And at some point, I found very amusing thing in Spain about how laser beams from aliens are actually turning off the Amazon fires, and it's like what is spread. At some point, we need to invest in education in the long term. But there is no easy solution, there is no quick wins on this, and I think that's a very long-term job. I would like to thank Avas for all the work they've been doing in this EU campaign, because without you, I think we could have missed a lot of disinformation that spread during the campaign. So thank you, both of us.
Lubos.
Thank you. Well, one of the problems is that the platforms are really frictionless kind of environment, that everything is in a real instant without any friction there. And one of the answers probably is, and platforms are already talking about it, is to introduce some kind of friction into that environment. For example, it is very easy to like something, or retweet something, reshare something, but if you don't have to really give it just half a second of thought, you know, it's very quick. So probably one of the solutions is to change this virality into something less immediate. So for example, if you are resharing something, you have to write at least something there, or some kind of, you have to just wait for 5 seconds or something, and then probably you can repeat the process.
Yeah, interesting idea. I have the last question over there, the gentleman to the right.
Hello, my name is Maurice Poland. I come from Croatia. I work in Compact as a researcher. My background is anti-corruption, but I'm working on media convergence and disinformation. I'm a little concerned about mixing two completely separate and unrelated things. Political party and political advertising and disinformation are completely different things. And I don't like personally hearing them in the same sentence, because we are playing then touching the very, very sensitive issue of democracy. Political parties have complete right to communicate to their audiences with the truth. That's the issue here, you know. So if they have truthful message to go, it's better to have it more. It's better that it is frictionless, that this communication flow is two-way, and that we have democratic processes and participation. On the other hand, the disinformation is something completely different. It's a very sophisticated thing. And even in US elections, with the President Trump and with the Brexit, those two things had actually, if you look in the details, had nothing to do with the political funding and political party financing. It was Cambridge Analytica and Robert Mercer playing with the political process on a very different level, on a very different game, in order to get the preferable result. So my question is, why are we mixing it? And if we are mixing those two things, why are we doing it? Because now we are playing in a very dangerous field where we can end up in a situation banning the freedom of speech and two-way communication.
It's a very general question. I think everybody has the right of 1 minute's reply, and then we go. I will start with you.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's not, well, it's connected. It's not the same kind of question, but it is connected, and we have to keep in mind, and I've heard a lot of criticism on what I'm going to say in Slovakia already, but the politicians are one of the main sources of fake news currently in the environment. So, and you know, when it's a political message and there is a disinformation included in there, it is disinformation. Now we see now what is going on with Facebook, that they decided not to check up on the political advertising, yeah, and there's the problem, and many people are saying, okay, you are just saying that you are not going to somehow, you know, to do something about the political process. You are already taking a stance. You are, you know, positioning yourself on one side of the equation, because not all politicians are doing that. There are only few politicians who are doing that, and from the one side of political spectrum.
Obama won elections on the same strategy.
Sorry?
Obama won elections on the same strategy. So we just sanctioning those that we don't like?
Well, or like peddling fake news. You mean the strategy? No, because
no. On the digital.
Yes, but this is a separate thing.
Sure.
These are separate things, and I think fake news or disinformation are disinformation, whether in the paid ads or in somewhere else. Now, whether the Facebook has a right to do what they're doing, or is it right, I'm not going to say now, but I think it's connected still.
That's correct. Yeah, I would.
Half a minute.
Okay. Sorry. So, I'm thinking about it. I think no, disinformation to us, disinformation is linked to all of these things. It's linked to hate speech. It's linked to extremism. It's linked to political advertising. It's not because by political advertising we don't understand only advertisement by political parties, but like who also can manipulate an election without being from a political party, but like with political advertisement, and get into the race and participate to the space race which we are looking at right now. The question at the end is the use of private data, and you mentioned Cambridge Analytica. I think that's a question about maybe the e-privacy directive can look into, like the way your personal data can be used for political advertising without you knowing it, and how people from Cambridge Analytica get into Robert Mercer and get into the Trump campaign is really worrying. But you have to look into political advertising to look at how people have been targeted, to understand if there are at some point something which is not right in doing this. But you're right in saying that Obama did the same 5 years ago. We just didn't have, at that time, I remember everyone saying it was genius. And now we're just waking up. And I think it's a good thing to wake up and to look into this, and to not consider the tech space as a virgin territory anymore with anybody with good intentions.
I'll be very brief, promise. I mean, indeed, it's a bit counterintuitive sometimes to mix these two elements, but if you simply look at it from the perspective of guaranteeing fair, clean, and clear elections, and we have rules in place, we have to do the research to understand if those rules are fit for purpose when a lot of the advertising in the future will happen online. And currently, I don't have a definitive answer for you, but I think it's fair to say that we have to open this question to all of you together. Yeah.
Okay. So, to put my word there, indeed, I think there is a very strong connection. I agree with you, Lubos. What we are trying to do is to create a space which is more intelligible for all users. The digital transformation of media has implied a loss of reference. The loss of reference. So to put transparency into political advertising is simply to recreate a reference and a way for people to understand the nature, not the content, but the nature of the message that they receive. Very well, and always in the same spirit of transparency and intelligibility of the space. It is the fact that the conduct that surrounds the digital technologies are conducts that are not known to most of the people, and the technique for amplifying, for astroturfing, for clickbaiting, for micro-targeting, and also the inherent bias that are into the recommendation algorithms, in the search algorithms, are very much unknown to most people. So what we are trying to do here is to recreate a level of intelligibility for all users that necessarily has to look at different aspects, including political advertising. Sponsoring is one form to give more prominence to the content compared to other types of content at the end of the day. So, but without further discussion, I would like very much to thank our panelists and the audience here who has been active in pinpointing certain critical aspects of the topic that we have been discussing. And I will close it here and leave the space for the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. We'll have a short coffee break of about 10 minutes because we're a bit late, and then we'll reconvene. Thank you.